we have one item left that we want to do for chapter 7. So let's get that done and kind of look at some of the things from chapter 8 from there. So the last thing we want to do for chapter 7 is we want to go and improve the way that the actual products look in that list of products, right? If we look at them right now, they are very plain, right? They're very plain. There's no clear delineation where's a product, and we're also missing some information, potentially. So what I want to do is enhance that a little bit. Now, a common thing that comes up once you start saying, well, I want to show products on the website, maybe I want to show them in multiple pages, right? Maybe I want to start showing them multiple places in the website. Well, to do that, I often want to be able to reuse some code, right? So I want to be able to take the part here that actually shows a product and break that off into a separate view. What we call that is a partial view. So a view is a complete page. A partial view is just part of a page, okay? So I'm going to create a new partial view. I'm going to put it under shared. So I'm going to right-click the shared folder, say Add View. Note that there's a little checkbox here, Create Partial View. So I'm going to check that. I'm going to call it Product Summary. Okay, so this is a partial view called Product Summary, and I'm putting it under the shared folder. Okay, so I've got it under the shared folder here. Now notice when I check that partial view checkbox, look at what it generated. Doesn't it normally put some stuff into our views? Normally put some code? When I check that partial view checkbox, you just start with an empty view entirely. It's no other than it being empty, there is no difference really between a partial view and a regular view. So you have to know as a programmer, know which ones are partial, which ones are not. You have to know that from memory, sort of thing. Now, they still have a model directive. So for this product summary, I'm going to say that the model is a single product. This is a representation of a single product. Okay. So I'm going to start with that. I'm going to add a bunch of code here. That's going to be how I show that product. So that product's going to be shown as a card, and you can see I've got the bootstrap stuff in there. So I'm showing the name, the price, and the description. So the whole point of this is I want to style the products to look nice, but I don't have to want to rewrite that anytime I want to show a product. I want to be able to just pull this off the shelf and reuse it. Okay. So let me go back to the list now, and go back to our list view. And this code in here that we're used to showing, we used to use to show the products, I'm going to replace that with this HTML helper HTML.partial. I tell it which partial view to use. So the partial it's going to use is product summary, and the model for that view is item. So this one line of code is going to say, go use that partial view to render each of my products.
Knows to look in shared.
Yes. By default, when it's looking for views, it'll look in the same folder as the controller you're on, and if it doesn't find that, it'll go to shared and look there. But putting in shared then means that I can use it on more than one controller. I can use it all throughout the website if I need to. Okay. If you have that in, you should be able to run the program. And let's look at what it should look like.
That's
So it should look like this with a bit of a border around each of the items. Okay?
so this is another case of wanting to be able to reuse that partial class in other.
Yes.
Okay.
So the partial view is one way to say, okay, I've got this standard sort of way of representing things. In this case, this partial view is a representation of a product. So now anytime I want to show a product to the user, I can use this partial view. You know, I don't have to re-implement it every time I want to show a product. One other question that was raised, so we have this page links, this HTML helper that we set up, right? We set up this HTML helper. Yes, I could have put most of this code into the view directly. I could have put this, rather than writing out this page, the HTML helper class, this extension method, I could have put it into the view, right? But how often do you think we have paging anytime we're showing data to the user, right? Pretty much every table that we show to the user, we're going to want to put paging on. So by putting it out here, this makes it something that's easy to reuse. It makes it something we can easily reuse anytime we want to show paging to the user. One of the reasons that I'm doing it this way, I could alternatively I could have used a partial view as well here. That would be another option. The reason I'm doing this is it ends up being just a nicer syntax, and sometimes it's a tool you need in your belt. This is the common way that we're going to do paging. There are third-party libraries out there as well that do set up paging, so those are things that if you were in the real world, those are things that you could use. You know, go grab a third-party package and just, and the ones I've used, they're generally this way. They generally set it up as an HTML helper. As far as going towards what I'm expecting you guys to do on the test in about 2 weeks, I'm not expecting all of this, right? I'm not going to expect everything that we're going here. I know we're covering a lot of bases. What more likely is going to be the case, I don't know for sure what the plan is for that next hands-on test is going to be, but what I may end up doing is saying, okay, here's the thing that we've built from chapters 7 through 12. Here's the finished product. Now I want you to add some stuff to it. So that will more than likely be the hands-on test, is to add some things to that or to build something simpler. I don't know which offhand, but it'll be one of those two things. Does that make sense? So I do expect you to understand. I do want you to make sure that you understand all the pieces that are going into here. But to build this up from scratch, yeah, no way, right? But this paging helpers, this class, this file that we have here, that's wide open. You can copy and paste that, reuse that as much as you want. I will probably at some point ask you to add some things to it, like the previous connect buttons, or to limit. Right now we're showing all the pages. A normal thing to do is to only show the certain number of pages near where you're at. So I may ask you to extend this and add a few things to it in the future. But for now, you can take it off the shelf and use it. Okay, so that's what we have for Chapter 7. Okay, that gives us a basic setup for this e-commerce site, right? Now, what are some notable things that are lacking here as it is currently? We're missing images. That's an important thing, which unfortunately I don't think there's images still in Chapter 12. So we'll have to go over that because this book actually skips that important question.
The ability to select a product.
Ability, what do you mean by selecting a product?
You know, like clicking on link or king and or the card and, you know, having the opportunity to add that to a cart or something.
Yeah. So we're missing a shopping cart, right? And we're missing a way to order those items, right? I can't add them to the cart. I can't place an order for them. So those are pieces that we want to do next. And that's the big thing actually in chapters 8 and 9 is introducing the shopping cart. So we'll start the shopping cart in chapter 8. We'll finish it up tomorrow with chapter 9. The other thing that we want to do with chapter 8, and this actually the first thing that we're going to do, is to be able to filter these products by category. So that's the first thing we're going to put in, the first feature we're going to put in, is to filter by category. And the way I'm going to set this up, there'll be tabs across the top for each category. That's the way I want to get this working. Okay. So, to set that up, let me go ahead and open up, let's see, I need to open up my other project. Project solution. Open up this one. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the product controller. And what we want to add is the ability to filter by category is problem number 1. I want to be able to filter by category, right? So a sensible thing to start with is, well, I probably need some way to pass in the category to display here, right? I need another parameter, right? So just for formatting sakes, I'm going to move these down because that line is getting awfully long. And I'm going to add another property here, string category is equal to null. So that way the user can pass in what category, can specify which category that they want to see. Okay. Now we still have to actually implement that and say, okay, well, let's only show products for that category. So the way that I generally filter is I use that where method or where clause. So where says I only want certain things that match my criteria. So I'm going to say where x arrow x dot category is equal to category. Let's start with that, right? So in theory, that should only give me the products that are in that category. Now, the order that we do these things is important because if I stuck the where down here after the take, well, then I'd be doing paging and then the filtering. It's important that I do the filtering first so that I don't end up with weird, like, hey, I've got empty pages, pages with no items and such. Okay, so I'll do that filtering first. Well, let's try that with just this in place. Okay. It's a problem, right? Now I'm not getting any products. I'm not getting any products right now. Let me try specifying a category. So I'm going to say category is equal to soccer. Okay, now I've got the soccer products, but for some reason when I initially go here and I don't pick a category, it doesn't show me anything, right? It doesn't show me anything. Why is that?
We have nothing that's null category.
Category ends up being null. So what am I saying? I go through each of the category. I say if the category for the item is null, then I'll keep it. I'm only keeping the ones with a category of null. But there are none with a category of null. So therefore I have none. Okay? So what I need to do instead is I want to say, well, if the category hasn't been specified, let's keep all of them. Okay? There's more than one way to do this. The way that the book does this is kind of how I'm going to show you here. So category equals null. So if the category is null, as in we haven't picked one, or the category matches, then we'll keep it. That's one way to solve it. So either we haven't picked a category or the item's in the category we picked, then we'll keep the item. Okay. If we run that, so okay, if I don't pick a category, everything's still good. If I do pick a category, category equals soccer. Okay, so that's fine. I've got the items for soccer. Notice that there's a little bit of a problem down here, right? It's still showing me as 3 different pages, and in fact, if I go to those other pages, I'll be going back to looking at all products, right? So 2 things I need to solve. I need to figure out the right number of pages, and I need those links to include the category. Okay? So how can I change the number of links, the number of pages to be right? Well, number of pages is based on the count of products, right? Right? So if I pick soccer, there's only 3 products. It still thinks that there's 9, right? So the way I can fix the count is I need to also incorporate that where clause into the count. So at that point, it'll figure out, oh, there's only 3 items in soccer. So I only need 1 page. So now I only have 1 page link here. Okay. Now to fix the links so that they preserve the category, I'm going to go to the product list view. Remember that we created this function here to figure out what the URL to that page is, right? So now we've got additional information. We need to pass that additional information on. Okay. I'm skipping ahead, I think, actually. I'm skipping ahead because I need to actually change my model first. I need to add the category that we're picking to the model. So let's go to product list model. You can see we already have those 2 things there. I'm going to say let's filter by category. So I need to know the category as well in my view model. So I'm going to call that current category. If I wanted to filter by price, right, all I would need to do is add a minimum and a maximum price to this view model and hook it up just like we're filtering for the category, right? Same kind of thing. So current category is there. I'm going to go back to the controller because I need to make sure I add that to the model. So I'm going to say current category is equal to the category we're looking at. So current category equals category. I see some quizzical looks over here. What's the question? Alex?
No, I'm just tired.
Oh, okay. It's all good. Scott?
So it's supposed to only display one page right now, or currently in its form?
Uh-huh. Well, it only shows one page if you specify in the URL what the category is. So remember, I had to do question mark category equals soccer to just get soccer, or question mark category equals chess to just get chess. So you have to specify that in URL. We haven't provided the UI for that yet. Okay. So now I can filter by that will give me the information I need there. Let's go back to the view, and I'm going to enhance this method here, this function here. So to this, I'm going to add, bring this down. So category is equal to model dot current category. So whatever the currently selected category, that's going to be part of the link now, part of the page links. And I hope you can see with this, right? If I'd written the code directly here, might it have been a little bit harder to enhance it, to start adding these additional fields, right? To change the link. This is why that we don't want to build that logic for building the URLs into the actual helper. When I have that here, so we can customize it. Okay. So let's try that. If I start here, you'll see the links don't include the category because I don't have a category picked. Do question mark. Question mark category is equal to soccer. I've just got soccer. You can see the link includes, if you look at the bottom left of your browser, when you hover over it, you'll see it's going to take us to category soccer. So clicking on there will keep it filtered to soccer. Same thing if I pick chess. So category equals chess. When I click the link, it's going to preserve that now. So going through pages won't change me to a different category. That's fixed. Okay. Now, I would like these URLs to be a little bit nicer, right? Probably. So that's one thing to kind of keep in their back pocket. We do want to make those look nicer. We'll come back to that though. I want to get the UI working first. Okay. So one trick that we can use to now add add the navigation links to every page, the list of categories, we can use something called a child action. Okay, child action is we call another action from our layout or our view and render its output inside of a view. Okay, so the way I'm going to set that up, I'm going to add a new controller. I'm going to call this the nav controller. Nav controller. What I want it to do is get the list of categories. So first I need a connection to the database, because in order to get the categories I need to go to the database. No, I have that in the wrong place. And you have that inside the class. There. Have that inside the class, not outside the class. Okay. So I've got my connection to the database. And I need to implement an action method. So we create this action method, call it menu. Menu is going to get the list of category names and then pass it off to a partial view that I'm going to create. So I've got a nav controller, creates this menu. Okay.
Did you get rid of that initial action result method?
Yeah, I did. I did get rid of it. I got rid of the index method. This is all I have here left. Okay. So I'm saying I've got a database connection. Let's walk through what this is doing. So I start first by looking at the database. And I say I want the products table. I want the whole products table of the database. Okay? Now, because all I want for these links is to just give you a link of each category, all I care about is the category. I don't care about the price. I don't care about the name of the product. The only thing I care about is the category. So select says, let's just pick off the category, throw everything else away. It's the only piece of data I care about. Now, one important thing to know, when I say db.products, that's an IEnumerable of products, right? At that point, right? Once I say select here, select category, it is now an IEnumerable of strings. It's no longer an IEnumerable of products, it is now an IEnumerable of strings. Okay? Questions on that? Okay, so it's an IEnumerable of strings. So now I want to sort them alphabetically, and I'm saying sort X by X. This works because now I have strings. So I'm saying sort the strings alphabetically. If I still had objects here, then I want to say, well, sort by this property, right? But because I've changed these to just a list of strings, that's why it says XX, because I still have to give it a method. I still have to give it a lambda of some sort. But I would just say sorted by itself. Okay? Distinct, any guesses to what that's about? Why do I need distinct?
Is it unique? Like,
Mm-hmm.
gets rid of the duplicates?
It gets rid of the duplicates, right? Because if I look at the products, how many different products are there under soccer? There's 4 products under soccer, right? So if I didn't do distinct, I have the category soccer 4 times. Probably not very user-friendly, right? We probably only going to see 1 copy of everything.
Could group by also work?
You can use group by as well. There's different performance constraints depending on what you want. Okay, so group by and distinct can accomplish that, but they work very differently. Okay, so distinct says throw away anything that is an exact copy of anything else. Okay, so I'm only getting the ones that are unique. Yes, and they're still ordered by. They're still ordered alphabetically because I ordered them alphabetically previously. Okay. Finally, I wanted to then take those and make them in a list. So here I have, after distinct, I still have an IEnumerable of strings. I want to finally turn it into a list.
Because we're making a database connection, you want to change that to be async eventually?
So I would like to.
Okay.
I would like to. There is one unfortunate thing to know, and I did try to do this conversion with child actions, which we're going to use here. We're going to use this as a child action. Child action doesn't support async, unfortunately.
Wow.
So MVC doesn't actually support doing an async in this child action. I wish there was a way around that. Unfortunately, MVC doesn't support it. So this I'm going to just do regularly synchronous and hope that that doesn't take too long. The reality is if I wanted to speed this up, I would change how my databases are structured, and I would go ahead and add a categories table, and that would speed things up. But this will work for now. So we're going to say grab the category names. We're going to now pass that to the view. Note that I'm calling partial view. I'm not calling view. If you call view, you're saying render an entire page. I'm saying I just want to render part of a page. Okay? Let's create that partial view now. So I'm going to go to the Solution Explorer. I'm going to right-click on Nav and create a view called, we're going to call that one menu. So this is Nav menu. Again, I'm going to create this as a partial view. So create that as a partial view. The model for this is an IEnumerable of strings. And then what comes next, I'm going to do a lot of bootstrappy stuff because we want to use the bootstrap tab layout. I'm going to just bring that in. I'm going to cut something out here real quick because I want to come back to and explain that part. Same thing here. Okay. There we go. So that's the basic code for the menu.
Raise it up. You did it as a partial view?
This is a partial view.
Okay.
So this is under the nav folder. It's called menu. This is a partial view. Once you get this typed in, please run it and open the nav menu page and see what you get. You're going to go to /nav/menus.
bootstrap supposed to be in there?
It won't be working, right? So let me run this and go show you what it looks like. You should be all seeing the same thing. So I'm at /nav/menu. Looks like this. Yeah. Well, our bootstrap classes are there, but it's missing the bootstrap style sheet. Why? Well, let's look at the actual source code that's
We'll bring
here.
this back,
Okay.
probably.
Okay. So look at the actual source code for this page. Notice that the only thing here is that UL. Only thing here is the stuff that we just put in that view. There's nothing else there.
Do layout pages not work with partial views?
Layouts are not applied to partial views. It's intentional, right? Because a partial is intended as a snippet that I can put into another page. And if I wrapped a layout around this, I wouldn't be able to inject it into another page, because I'd end up with 2 copies of head and body tags and it would be a mess.
So you were saying you put this nav inside of the layout page and
Right.
somehow import it.
So we're going to take all this code, basically we're going to use this action to generate this code and then kind of nestle it inside of our layout, right? So this is all the code that it's generating because it's just a partial view. Okay. Note that if I go back to my controller, if I had this as view, let's just look at this to just show you. Oh, I need this to be action results. If I was returning view, right, then I get the layout page and everything, right? But because I'm returning partial view, I'm not getting that layout, anything from the layout page, okay? That's why I'm saying return partial view, okay? Now, putting this into the layout is super, super easy. What I'm gonna do is add another nav tag here. And then I'm going to call an HTML helper again. So HTML.action. This is an action, not action link. Remember, action link is a link to another page. HTML action says take the actual page and kind of put it in my layout here. So HTML action, it's going to be menu is the name of the action. Name of the controller is nav. Oh, I need to not have a semicolon there. So just doing that is going to put this snippet into every page on our website. The reason that I did this as a child action instead of just a partial view is because we need to actually access the database. If I didn't need to access the database, I could have just done this as a partial view instead of doing this as a partial action. So here's what it looks like now. Now I have these links up top. Okay, so I can click chess, soccer, water sports, all products, and that will let me go through the different categories. Okay. Yep.
Why does it work? Research.
You have a error.
go back to your menu. CSHL. Yep. Go to the product control. So you haven't used this count here. You use the count.
Does he go to this page?
You're still using the old count. You use this number. It should go to
Sure.
so you get this. Yeah, just equals. Yes, problem solved.
Started up.
See the menu. Going back to where we go. So here, categories: water sports, soccer, chess. Sorry.
How come when you start it up, it goes to like the...
Well, it's page 2 soccer.
Yeah. It's actually probably that was true.
Page 2 soccer. That's interesting. Because it's still, the problem is it's still on page 2. I know there's something we can fix later on to probably do that. So the way I would solve that.
Yeah.
So let's go back to our menu. Let's look at this. I think the problem, so the why that's actually happening is on the odd side as far as I'm concerned. But the way we can fix that in our URL, if we say page equal 1, that should fix it so it's always taking you to the first page. If you switch categories. Okay. So looking through the code here, let's kind of look at what we've got here. So at the top, we've got an unordered list. Unordered list that's been styled with nav tabs. So nav tells it this is some sort of navigation I want to style it as, and specifically I want to style it as tab navigation. Right? So nav tab says everything in here, we want to display it as tabs. Okay? Nav item, that's what we're going to add each of the list items. Nav link, we add each of the anchor tags. Okay? Now, one thing to note here, I'm creating the actual anchor tags this way. What was the other way that I showed you to create anchor tags?
Was that action link?
Yeah, HTML action link, right? I could have done that here too. The reason that I'm not using HTML action link is doing it this way will allow us in the future to add font awesome icons to it. If you use HTML.action link, you can't add font awesome icons to those links because you can't put HTML into the body of what goes between the start and the end tag. So by doing it this way, it allows me to do something more sophisticated. There, make things look nicer. So that's the reason that I'm using this instead. So URL.action is a way to generate that URL. So it's very similar to action link, but it just generates a URL instead of generating an actual link tag. Okay, so this is going to go back to the home page because we haven't specified any other route values, so just list product. And this one's going to say, okay, well, let's loop through each of the categories and send them to category page 1. Okay? Now, that's all fine and good. One issue that you see here, if you run it, how does the user know which page they're on? I mean, sorry, which category they're looking at? Do they have any way of knowing which category they're looking at?
They could look at the URL, but I doubt they would do that.
They probably won't. They could, but they probably won't.
Couldn't you put like an active class on?
So I need to add an active class, right? Okay, that is what I want to do. I do want to add an active class. But the question is how, right? The question is how. How do I add that active class? Well, I need to know, I need to know which one they're currently looking at. I need to know which category that they are currently looking at, right? So what I'm going to do to take care of that, there's a little bit of magic I can use to find out the current category. So, and this is a little bit different than how the book does it, so just a fair forewarning, this is, again, a little bit different than how they do this. What I'm using is this property called view context. View context lets me get into some additional data about the view that I'm in and where it is. Route data gives me access to all those route values that are used to route the page to the controller. And specifically, I want to say I want the category route value. So that should give me the current category. So remember, that's going to be null initially if we don't have any category selected. And then if it's soccer, it's going to be soccer and such. Okay. So if they don't have a category selected, if the category is null, we want to apply the active to this first link, right? So the way I'm going to do that, I'm going to put some razor syntax into here, and I'm going to say if the current category is equal to null, then I want the active class. Otherwise, I want no class there. Okay. Similar thing I'm going to do for each of the category links, but I have to be a little bit different. So on their front, I'm going to say if the current category is equal to that category, that's where I want active or inactive. Note that these two are different. This one I'm checking for null, this one I'm checking for is it equal to a category. They look very similar, but they're just slightly different. Have them all right, when you click on a tab, it should like that one.
I was thinking in my head here.
Oh, I thought right, right. Huh?
It's not highlighting.
Yeah, it's not really good. I think there is one other thing that I had to do, and I probably did in the right order. So I think the other thing I have to do is go back and change the routing configuration, and I think that'll fix it. So. Because currently I think category is being used as, it's not being used as a route value, it's being used as a query parameter, but it's not as actual route value. So I need to fix that. So let's go to route config. Remember that we added this route yesterday, right? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to completely kind of rewrite that. Let me explain all of it before you type it all out. There's going to be quite a bit, so give me a chance to explain it, and then we can type it in. Okay. So remember these routes, they're always processed from top to bottom, right? So the first routes that I have, this is what it's going to look at first and say, is it that route? Okay. So first it's going to look here and say, okay, is the route where you're at, does it match this URL pattern, right? So this URL pattern is only going to match for the root, only going to match for the home page. Does that make sense? Because there's empty string there, it's only going to match for the home page. Okay? So when you're on the home page, I want the controller that you use as product, the action is list, it's going to be category null and page 1. Okay? If you go to a path, which is going to be /page 2, right? Well, then I want you to use product, list, category still null, but use this page that you gave me. Okay? It is important that these, again, it is important that these are in order, right? So if it's at the root, we'll go here. If it's just /page, that'll be, I want to go a specific page, but not in a category. If I only specify a category, then we're going to say, okay, filter by that category, but go to the first page of that category. So if I do /soccer, this will now take me to the soccer category. Does that make sense? /soccer will take me to the soccer category. Why is it important that this comes after that? Any idea?
Because it will, if you had written just page, it will read it as a category.
Or page 2, whichever way. So if I had these out of order,
It would think that page 2 is a category.
yes, exactly. If I typed in /page 2, it would go look for a category named page 2. So the order of those matter. And basically, here I'm saying, we'll take, if it's /anything, then treat that /anything as a category. But this is saying, well, if it's page, if it starts with the keywords page, then treat it as a page number. If it doesn't start with page, then we're going to treat it as a category. That makes sense? Then the next one I want is a combination of those two. So let's say you say soccer /page 2. Well, now you've given me both of those pieces of information. So in that case, I want to go to the soccer category and page 2 of the soccer category. That makes sense? And then finally, I have this last one. So if you say controller /index, /action, then I know that you're wanting to access that. So for instance, if you're saying product /list, well, then you're going to follow here. That makes sense? So order of those matter. Now, there's one thing in here I kind of skipped over, going over this. Notice for both of these two, this second route and this fourth route, that there is a constraint on it. So that constrains what's valid to put in that page number. And basically, the way to explain this is a series of 1 or more digits, 0 through 9. /d says a digit 0 through 9, plus says 1 or more of those. That's what we call a regular expression. Okay, so you may have seen those before. At this point, you can now copy and paste. You can kind of take everything that I have there and put it in.
I can zoom out.
Let's see if I can.
Page and category down.
I hope you can see that. So,
Okay, we still include the ignore route.
yes, you'll still have the ignore route up at the top.
category.
It needs to be category equals. Sorry, Bob.
You'll notice that the defaults for all those routes are the same, so you can just copy and paste them from there. Constraints. And then we'll see a column there. Colon. Page is equal to. Outside quotes. And then inside there's slash equals. I'm not gonna use it. So not gonna.
So
Yeah,
this one, what was it, previously?
comma after
So action
default.
ID.
Yeah, you can replace that one with the last.
I'm busy with that.
This is the last one.
This is expected.
And the pages work? Mm-hmm.
Page equals, page one.
Now, I just had an idea. Couldn't you,
Mhm.
since all of the defaults are the same, couldn't
Mhm.
you create an anonymous object and then just
You could.
pass it to all of those?
Yeah, you could. You could. You absolutely could. So if you're looking, this is page, just for reference, this is page 202 or 2 to 203 is where you'll find that in the textbook. 202 to 203.
Is this verbatim from the textbook?
This is verbatim from the textbook. Okay. Scott, you're still going?
Just that last line
Okay.
there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we need to delete one of those extra brackets.
You're right.
What page did you say? 202, 203?
Yep, this is 202 to 203. That's where you can find this. So let's go ahead and just try this to make sure it works. So let's test the path. So first at the root, right, we're seeing all the categories and we're seeing page 1. Okay? Seeing all the products in page 1. All good. If I go to /soccer, I should be seeing just soccer. And you can see now that my soccer tab is highlighted. Okay. If I go to /chess, you should see a similar thing there. Okay. Now, water sports has a space in it, right? So spaces in URLs are interesting. If I just type it in there with a space, you'll notice that it automatically converts it to this %20. Okay? Because you're not allowed to have spaces in URLs. You have to represent them with a %20. So the browser will take that and say, oh, okay, I need to turn those things and replace those things. So that's that. Let's say I want to go to page 2. So I should be able to go to water sports, page 2, like that. That should work. We'll notice that there's no data because, well, there's no page 2 for water sports. If I go to just /page 2, that should work here as well, and you'll see I have page 2, all products. Okay? So all those links should work, and that means all of those links are now user-friendly, right? You can easily look at those and say, oh, I know where you are, right? Okay. I could also, in there, I can still type in product/list. Remember, that still works because of that very last path, very last route that we have at the end. Does that make sense?
And then could you add like the category on top of the full URL?
I could. So I can still do $category equals soccer. So in doing all this, none of those links should have broken. All those links still work. What I've added is more user-friendly links.
Although I've noticed if you do it like that, it doesn't highlight the tab.
Oh well. Yeah. Maybe a downside. Okay. Essen, you have a question?
Okay, because when I run my, it goes straight to the bullet point list.
You probably have nav menu open. Just change the URL in the browser. Just go to back to your root, like this. Just change the URL to go back to the root of your website. Yep.
Yeah, or mine doesn't quite highlight
so it won't highlight the tab that you're on.
Yeah. I guess color doesn't really.
Have you seen the new Apple keynote?
I started watching it.
I watched like the review of it. I didn't watch the actual. Yeah. So the runs.
See, we just do it in the Apple Parks Market.
Oh, you did the nav or
When you say.
Yeah.
No. You have to put it on.
I'm thinking about getting like the Apple Watch
Yeah.
the Series 6.
It's like 2K.
Because it has an
Yeah,
always
but
on display to the Apple Watch. So like, you
So
know,
this
you do
marks,
like this,
all,
see it,
if you're
so
all
it's always
products
on.
that marks that one active, but you need another one here, and you say current category equals.
No.
Equals category.
Oh, so like the screen like dims out a little, but you can still see. But it's the same battery life. Yeah. Which is nice.
How much though?
Oh, I think it's like 400. How much is that one?
Try that.
Somewhere around there, isn't that?
Because you're applying active
I think
when
it's
it's
like
first,
it.
like, you're never applying active.
I think you can do useful.
You know, I never.
That's just because you can go where you have this open.
This is for starters, maybe.
The way to fix that.
Would you usually just use your phone? Because probably because you're just not used to it, right? Not used to it.
Yeah, like I didn't find it very useful.
It's not useful enough to amount. I wouldn't really touch my mind.
Oh.
What can you exactly do with it? Just
Under.
Super useful. Right, another project.
Properties. And change this to specific page.
It's kind of nice.
And then when you run it, regardless of where you run it from, it'll always be approved.
and it pairs with your phone.
Right. And I could just actually work on that. Like I went back, I would.
Yeah.
But you got money. You get
Right.
text.
Right.
New studies.
Yeah.
So.
I'm thinking about getting one. It's cool.
I didn't really use too much as like when I was on it, but just like.
Anyway, so you need to have it open your workout.
These are good.
Okay, do a control F5 on there.
But I don't think so.
I'm hoping to make the new AirPods or something. Like, when they came out with the wireless.
They did. AirPods too.
But like they're not really changing.
Same.
It's like the same things that like I might as well just buy the cheap one. You know?
Yeah. Is it really cheap? It's like 20 bucks.
Like the other one was like $200. Like
Yeah.
it's like $200.
Does the
Well,
route
seriously,
zero-
something like that. See an Apple Watch.
I don't think it's around.
Like you might as well just at this point you might as well just try to it works.
Yeah.
It's gonna be so
I have yeah, I like like my like phone for some reason goes CarPlay when I use like Spotify or whatever.
No, it's on.
Like
You have a 2002 car.
I know.
You get a car.
I know. But it somehow does.
Yeah, I wish.
So, like, motor attached.
Somehow it recognizes I'm driving.
Kind of Spotify.
Yeah.
It puts your car view.
Yeah.
It's your phone on. It's like the same system that like, you know how your phone has like a fitness.
Yeah.
You tell how much.
Oh, yeah.
It's
Like how you walk.
Yeah, exactly. It's that same system. It can tell you people speeds. At least it's faster than
Categories.
So one of those should be mapped out.
You just like click and say a message.
Oh, okay.
But you can see the messages. Each second. So if you keep going through your real dash, but it's traffic.
What the heck?
So text messages. He goes through, he's like, oh, that message, I gotta get my car real quick.
Like a cop car or something.
Or like he has like, I message on the stop, every 10 minutes.
But that should mess up.
Oh, that's on the wrong one. So you have it on the nav item instead of the nav item.
Yeah, I'm working through that.
See, this is up on the nav.
Dude, Apple Maps, they're doing, it's like outdated with some of the stores, like.
Yeah, it is.
Some of the stores are just outdated, so. Google is always
Google My
outdated.
Business.
Google is always outdated.
Oh, no. Oh my God. Yeah, that's just.
Yeah, Apple hates like what, it hates like the default to Google Maps too.
That's why I don't have to just make that happen.
Yeah, I deleted it. Sometimes you can leave those as built-in options. No?
You can leave the caps.
Okay. I wanted to default to Google Maps, having that, that makes sure it's gonna happen. Okay.
Would you like to use
What does? Oh, yeah.
I would use Wade.
Well, I see that they're changing.
15 hours to get home, but I got
They're
pulled
changing.
because the cop was not.
Because of you're missing something important.
What?
See this here?
That's so stupid.
It's becoming nav link, no space.
Bro,
That saves me.
it did not save me.
I've never used it before.
I'm so
What
mad.
exactly is it?
If you're going anywhere over.
You're just
Bro,
missing
this
space.
cop was hidden.
What is it?
So hidden in the week.
It's like.
Well, it's boot strike. I mean, it's CSS. There's an error in your CSS, so it just it didn't apply it.
Yeah.
Because it was nav link active all one word. It just didn't apply any CSS to it. Okay, so we've achieved that first part, right? Dalton, Adam's paying at your attention. So we've achieved that first part. We can now filter by category, right? We filter by category and we've got efficient routes for those. And you've seen the way we implemented that, we use what's called a child action. So you've seen a child action, which is one way to reuse code. We've seen how to use a partial view to reuse the layout for this, for the items, for the products. And then you've also seen how to create your own HTML helper. All three of those are ways to kind of reuse code and not have to write it every time, right? Obviously, they have different advantages, different upsides. What's your question?
Sorry, you were talking about child actions again. I just wanted to
Right.
clarify. The child action happens when we're calling the partial view result.
No, the fact that it's a child action is due to that all right, let me minimize that. When in the layout, you see I've called HTML action.
Okay.
That's what makes it a child action. The fact that you're calling it via HTML action makes it a child action.
Okay.
That makes sense? Now let's clarify. So HTML action, that gives me a child action. If I look at the list page, here I'm calling HTML partial, right? So HTML partial gives me a partial view. HTML action gives me a child action. They look very similar, right? They look very similar. HTML action says go run this other action method, and then whatever it outputs, put it here. This partial view says here is I've got a model, this item, go render that model using this view. Does that make sense? So this ends up running view code. This runs both controller and view code, right? So what's the difference here? Am I going back to the database? Am I needing to do anything in the controller in this case? I'm not, right? So this doesn't take a trip back to the controller versus this takes a trip back to the controller. Does that make sense? Similarly, if I'm writing this, we don't make another trip back to the controller. We're just staying in view land. Okay. So the next thing I want to do is, now that I've got that baseline set up, I want to go ahead and create a shopping cart from that. I want to add a shopping cart to this. There's a fair amount of code to get this set up, to get this running. The shopping cart, which is part of why the shopping cart's kind of broken up into chapters 8 and 9. So we'll get as far as we can with that today. But the first thing we want to do is create a model for that cart. Okay. So under models, we're going to create a new file. We're going to call it cart. New class. Okay. Now, I need actually more than one class to make this work. So if you think about the way the shopping cart works, it's kind of like you've got multiple different, remember you can have different items in it, and you can have a different quantity for each item that's in your cart, right? So I'm actually going to, first I'm going to add another class. I'm going to call it cart line. I'm going to actually add it into the same file. So cart line represents a single line in your shopping cart. Okay, and all it has is a product and a quantity. So at 3 kayaks, 2 bling bling kings, etc. That's all it stores. Now to the cart, the cart has a list of lines. So I'm going to make that a private variable, private member variable. So you have a cart line, and then the cart has a list of lines. Graham, you'll want to create a cart class under the models folder. That's what we're working on right now. Now, one of my goals here with writing this class is I want to make sure that I'm encapsulating this list. I don't want the rest of the world to know and to have direct access to this list to change anything there. I want to have control over that. Esten, you had a hand up? Okay. So when I expose this, well, first of all, I need to give users a way to iterate through the lines. Okay. So I'm going to add a property, public property, of type IEnumerable cart line that exposes this. Note one very important thing here. This is not list, right? I'm not saying list cart line. I'm saying IEnumerable cart line.
Why is that? With the annual versus
So if I made this list cart line, I've now lost any sort of encapsulation that I wanted.
Oh, okay.
Because now anybody who's using the cart class can literally get to my list and start adding and removing items and doing whatever they want with it. I don't want that. I want this to be encapsulated. I want them to not have direct access to that list because I need to do some management with that. For instance, making sure that there's only one, let's say you want to buy a kayak, I only want to have one kayak line on there. And if anybody can get direct access to the list, I can't ensure that. Okay? So I want to make sure that that is IEnumerable, which means that you can ask for this and iterate through it, but you can't just start manipulating it. Does that make sense? Because a list has add and remove buttons, methods, and the like. Okay? So I don't want to expose those. Okay? The next thing I need to do, what are the other operations that I need to be able to do on my cart? I need to be able to add things to it. I need to be able to remove things. And then once you've made your order, I need to actually be able to remove everything. Okay? So other three pieces that I need to have in there is the ability to add, remove, and delete everything. Okay? Now, before we go too far, one property I'm also going to need in here, I'm going to need to know whether or not the cart is empty for certain things. So I'm going to add another method. It's going to be type boolean, or bool, sorry, type bool, and I'm going to call it is empty. So this is going to return true if it's empty and false if it's not.
Can you also do lines.any?
I could. Since I already know I have a list here that already has that count method, this is quick. But yes, I could use it. I could use lines.any. Okay. So I'm going to add that in there. So I need an add method. So it's definitely going to be type void. It's definitely not going to return anything. I need a remove but method. It's going to remove something from a single product from the cart. And I also need a clear method. Okay. So all of these are void because they're not going to return anything. Okay. They're going to go do something to the cart, but they won't return any results. Okay. Well, what about add? Let's say I want to add something to the cart. What kind of data do I need to have in order to be able to add something to the cart? What do I need as far as inputs go?
The product that's being added.
Well, I need the product. Okay, so let's add that. Do I need anything else? What if I want to add 3 kayaks to the cart? I need a quantity. Okay, so int quantity. Okay, so those are going to be my inputs for adding. What about removing?
Probably say the same too.
Okay, well, the way I'm going to set it up, remove, it's just going to remove an entire line. So if I remove the kayaks, it's going to remove all of the kayaks. So for the remove, I'm actually just going to add the product. Okay, that's a UI decision. If you had a UI where you were going to potentially remove a certain number, then you might put a quantity in there, but I'm going to say I completely want to remove all of the items. Okay. What about clear? If I want to remove everything from the cart, do I need any inputs?
No.
Don't need any inputs. Don't need to know what you want to remove because you want to remove everything. Okay? Well, clearing's easy. Clearing's easy because there's already a method to do that built into the list class. So I can just say list.clear, and that will remove everything from the list. Oh, not list, lines. Lines.clear. That will remove everything from my shopping cart. Yep.
Never mind. It's I was going to ask why you're referring to lines, but it's because
The variables named lines.
right. I was gonna to clarify. I was gonna ask why you're not using the property and using the field instead, but it's because the property is listed together. That's right. I mean, because
No, it's because again, it's encapsulation. So ideally, if I'm working on a member that's part of my class, I nearly always want to reference the field, most of the time. If I'm directly referencing something that's in my own class, you generally want to reference the field directly and not use any sort of property. The other thing is, this is IEnumerable, right? There is no clear method on IEnumerable. So if I try to call that, it would say, I can't find a clear method. Okay. Now, what about removing? Okay. What do I need to call to remove things from the list? What method should I call here?
Where?
Say where?
Yeah.
There's element adds.
Huh?
Remove.
Or remove add, okay. Yeah.
So I actually have a few different options here, right? So remove says remove a single item from the list, but it relies on equality. It has to say, are these two items equal? Okay. So in order to make the remove method work, I would actually have to implement the equals method on my cart line class, because otherwise it wouldn't know which ones are equal. Okay. Because by default, equals is based on where are they in memory, not even looking at the data that's inside them. So remove, probably not the one I want here, because that's going to require quite a bit more work. What about remove at? Well, remove at says remove it at this specific index. Well, do I know what index in the array, in the list that it's at? I don't. If I knew, okay, that'd be great. I could remove index 3. But I don't know what index they're at. Okay? Similar thing with remove range. Range assumes that you have all indexes already, right? So what I'm actually going to do is remove all, because that's going to let me go ahead and put a predicate in there and say, I want to remove things that match this predicate. Okay? Now, what conditions could I potentially use to determine whether or not I want to remove it?
Just the product that was passed into it.
Now, I want to use the product. What part of the product do I want to use?
The ID.
The ID, right? So I want to say any products that are in my cart with that same ID, remove them, right? So I'm going to say for the lines, say x.product ID. So if the product ID in that line is the same as the product that I passed in, I want to remove it. So I'm going to remove all the items with that same product ID. Again, because that is our primary key. It's unique to that there. Okay. What about adding? What if I want to add something to the cart?
You can just
Add range.
Add range? Well, add range says add multiple things.
Well, but uses an IEnumerable.
Yeah, add range takes multiple things. So add is if I want to add multiple products, multiple lines to it at once. Add is just add a single one. So that's what I want. I'm adding a single line. So I'm going to say add new cart line. I'm going to use an object initializer to set up that cart. I need to set that line. So product equals product. Quantity equals quantity. Yes?
Just out of curiosity, if we were just removing a single product and not an entire line, as our UI decision, how would we attack that remove?
How would we attack that remove? Well, we need to decrement the quantity.
Okay.
Right? We need to decrease the quantity until it gets to 0 or negative, at which point we remove it.
Okay.
Right? So there's a little bit more to that we would need to do. Okay. Fix me. So what we're not doing right now is preventing the user from having the same product on again and again and again. We'll come back and we'll fix that. I want to kind of get the basic version of this up and running, and then we'll come back and fix that. Okay. So we can add items now. We can remove them. We can clear that. Okay. Let's go to the list view. What I want to do is now add a button so you can say add it to cart, right? Well, remember we've moved this over to a partial view, right? So if I want to go add a button to it, I need to actually go look at product summary. So product summary, we're going to add a button here. Let me pull it up over here. Now, the code that I'm going to put in here is going to be a little bit strange because, yes, I want to add a button, but when you click that button, I want it to actually submit it as a post request, not as a get request. Okay? If I just put it as an action link and just put it as a link, anchor tag, it would go in as a get request, which you don't want to do get requests if you're changing data, right? So adding to cart is changing data, which means it needs to go in as a post request. Well, links, you can't change the method that they get sent on. I need to have a form, right? So I'm going to have a tiny little form here instead of a button. Does that make sense? Simply because I want it to be action method post. I want it to be method post. Okay. So it's going to post to the add cart. It's going to be a form that posts the add cart method of the cart controller. It's going to pass some hidden data, and there's my bootstrapified button. Okay, so effectively, when I click this button, it's a submit button, so it's going to submit this form. You'll see that I have two hidden fields here, right? First thing I pass in HTML hidden is the name of that hidden field. The second thing is the value. Okay? So this is going to create an input tag, type hidden with that name and value. Okay? Which means that data is going to be sent to our action method that's going to deal with adding things to the cart, right? So obviously this part's pretty self-explanatory. I need to know the product ID that I want to add. I need to know the product ID of what I want to add to my cart. The second part here is once I add it to the cart, I want to have a way to come back to the search page the page that I was on previously. So that's where I'm adding this return URL, gives me a way to get back to the page I was just on. That makes sense? So I'm going to use that as a backlink. Okay. Request.path.url.path inquiry gives me that current piece of the path of where I'm currently at on the website. And that's all I need to know to come back here.
So what is that sent through? Just the post request?
So this sends a post request, right? And when we see this, we'll see that there's, remember just like I had the page and the page size as parameters on that action method? These are going to be parameters on an action method that I'm going to write
in the cart controller already.
Right. So it's going to take a product ID and it's going to take a return URL. So this is going to be an integer, that's going to be a string. Okay. So this is on the cart controller. I don't have a cart controller yet, so let's go make one. So I'm going to right click the controllers folder, say add controller. We're going to call this the cart controller. Okay. So I do need to access the database. So I'm going to put that as the first line of my controller, just like we're used to. So SportsStore DB, I need that to be able to connect to the database. The reason I need that, I need to be able to actually, given a product ID, I need to go load the rest of the information about the product. Okay. Now, one important question here. Let's say I want to store your cart. I want to store your cart data somewhere. Okay. What are my options for storing that cart data? Okay.
Making a model and having.
Okay,
that.
so a cart class,
Yeah.
right?
Well, yeah, we already have that.
I have a cart class.
A new table, a database?
I could put in a new table. I could make some sort of shopping cart table. Then I have to manage somehow life cycle and figure out what users have which shopping carts, right?
But you would also be able to come back to it later.
Yes, I could come back to it at any time. Right, so that would be a benefit of that. And that's actually what most websites do, is they end up putting it in a database. I'm going to follow along with what the book does, which is a little bit different. So we're going to use a different tool, just so you can kind of see that tool. We'll talk more about it. What are some other tools? Other tools that you've heard of storing data. Whether or not you've used them, there's probably at least one or two that you've heard of.
Cloud storage.
Okay. You ever heard the term cookie? You've heard the term cookies. Okay, so cookies is one way to store data. Cookies are stored in the actual browser. The browser stores the cookie files, and every time you load their website, it sends all of the cookies that they have to the server. And the server gets an option to change them if it wants, and then it'll save those new cookies, send them with every request. So that's one way that you can save data, okay? Another way which was introduced, there's another two options that were introduced with HTML5, one of them being local storage, which allows us to save things on the browser again, and save them with kind of key value pairs, but they're only accessible through JavaScript. Okay, so they're not actually sent every time you access the web server. It doesn't send that data. You have to access it through JavaScript and say send it along.
Can't you use like JSON data or something?
If you were sending it as the body of like a post, yes, I could send JSON data back and forth. We're not really at the point where we have all the tools for that yet, but that is an option. Session storage is another one that's very similar to local storage, which was used in HTML5. Both of those are stored on the browser. The server doesn't automatically get access to those. You have to say, I want to send this data to the server. So both of those are an option to store your data. Difference between local storage and session storage. Local storage is stored, well, as long as you want, until you delete it. Session storage gets deleted, is specific to a specific browser tab, and if you close that browser tab, it's gone. So those are options, okay? The other option is what's called server-side session storage, okay? This is a system that's been around for a long time. PHP has it, all versions of ASP have had it. It exists if you're writing a server written in Java. Pretty much every system has a system of session storage, okay? The way session storage works, when users visit your website, they get randomly assigned a number. They get randomly assigned what's called a session ID, okay? It's usually pretty long, but they get randomly assigned a session ID. That session ID typically gets stored in a cookie. So they get given the random ID, that's all the browser stores, is that cookie. Now that cookie usually is set up to expire maybe 15 minutes since their last activity, right? So it has a lifetime on it. Those sessions have a lifetime, okay? But it's specific to, you have a different ID, so therefore you have different data. Generally, the default kind of setup for that with ASP.NET is those session data on the server, it's stored in memory. Okay, so if the server goes down, all your session data is wiped. Server comes back up, there's no session data. So it's very, very temporary. It is possible to move that session data, use that session storage, and move it into a database. I strongly recommend you don't do that. It can be done, don't do it. It's not worth the effort. One of the better solutions that exists out there now is to use something called JWT with a combination of local storage, but we won't go through that today. So we're going to use the session storage that's stored on the server, okay? This will work. It's probably the easiest way to set it up. It's not the way I would recommend you setting up a shopping cart in the real world. Partly because, hey, it's gone after 15 minutes permanently. You can't get it back. If the user's inactive, their shopping cart's gone. The other thing that happens, they don't work well for scaling. So the way that session storage works is it's specific to a specific server or specific actual process on a computer. So let's say I've got 5 server machines, right, that I'm randomly assigning you to kind of split out the load, splitting out users. So whenever you visit my website, you'll get assigned to one of those 5 servers, right? Well, your session is specific to a server. So if I connect here and I say this server add to cart, okay, this server knows now you have this product in the cart, but all the other 4 don't, right? So session storage does not work well in the real world simply because we need more than one server at some point. At some point you're going to need more than one server, and so it doesn't scale out, okay? But we're going to do it this way because it's an easy way to kind of get started, right?
Now might be the time for a break.
Okay. Let's do that. Let's come back at 4:05.
He's just the worst. I hate him so much. His my little brother loved him, dude. He's this rapper, and he's just got like 6'9", like tatted all over his face, body. He just looks like a clown. Like he's got like wrinkled hair, and he was basically rapping about doing illegal. He was rapping about basically trying to stop hard, but then the feds came and arrested him. And they're like, hey, like you're rapping about all this stuff. Well, we have all this evidence. So he goes to jail. And then fast forward a couple months, basically, now he's snitching on like all of his buddies. And like I was just reading this article, or I saw the headline, and it's like Takashi's family is scared for their lives and will be no shows in court.
Yeah, because they probably threatened him with his, they probably said he'll have his freedom if he snitches.
Yeah, he's just ridiculous. Like, I can't stand him.
But, I mean,
there's something about, I don't know what it is, but
like, that blows my mind because, like, he gets arrested for rapping about this stuff, but then you got, like, the big artists of the 90s, like, I mean, Eminem, Dre, and Snoop Dogg, like, all of them rapped about the same stuff.
yeah, there's a couple of them. I know there's a guy like Little Boosie, I think.
Well, he got locked up for he was in his gang, the people we hung with, and like he was kind of doing it too, like drug smuggling through the industry and stuff like that. Even though he doesn't really live the life that he does, and then all of a sudden he's going to jail for that. Then the problem is he's snitching about it, and like telling who's the people who's doing it.
I mean, those
are the people that want to go kill him. Like, hey, you
right?
tell them.
But I'm just like, what I think is funny is that he got arrested for it, but like, there's so many other rappers that have done the same stuff and rapped about it and never got caught.
Yeah,
and it's all along like they can prove it or not. You know what I'm saying? If you sitting up here saying you killed a guy on this street and whatever, and then all of a sudden the police like, well, hey, wasn't there a murder on that street or something? You know what I'm saying? They listen to it. Of course they're gonna be like, all right, you're the first line guy we're gonna go to.
Did he rap about stuff like that?
No, he just rapped about shooting and killing, but then they found out he was doing like drugs and stuff, like selling drugs and stuff, and they was like, hey.
yeah, like he wasn't the worst of them either.
Yeah.
Like out of his friends, but like it seemed like he got all the charges. So now he's snitching. Dude, how are you gonna go into witness protection? Like whenever you look like that.
Yeah, man, you just gonna have to go ahead and just shave all that off and put a bunch of makeup on.
I don't really pay attention to rap music, so.
I just hear about it, and like I just thought this guy's so ridiculous. Like, I automatically hated him. My little brother was hyping him up, but then now he got arrested, and now he's snitching, now he's turning wicked. I was like, dude, it just gets worse and worse for this guy. So I kind of have a laugh at it, but yeah, he's screwed. Especially like, how are you gonna go into witness protection? You got a big 6'9" on your face.
Yeah.
How are you gonna hide?
Burqa?
Right, yeah, change religion.
Sunglasses everywhere you go, and
Just, cap.
Go bald, man, just put some makeup on and cover all that stuff up.
Shit.
Change your name to Charlie.
just labor tattoo removal.
Yeah. Heard that stuff hurts.
Maybe a tattoo around the eye, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you might go blind. Maybe I should have done this. I see a lot of people, not a lot, but I guess, just get like face tattoos, like willy-nilly, like no big deal. And I'm just like no, I would never
Cover
do
that up.
Yeah, I was just like, that's forever.
It's one thing to get a tattoo where it's usually covered. Would be fine, but.
Somebody with face tattoo before.
I don't think this school's got any policy on tattoos.
Maybe like offensive ones.
I haven't seen anything in the handbook about tattoo policy.
I think it is mentioned if you look in the student handbook, but I think it's
Not enforced.
Well, it's not so much that it's not enforced, it's actually not usually an issue. I haven't seen too many people in here come through with too many tattoos, but.
Because like, I know last year there was somebody in our class last year that had a full sleeve,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
but they never said anything to him.
I think if there's anything in there, it's only about what kind of images are on it.
Yeah, it's gotta be appropriate or.
Yeah.
Any gang affiliations. So.
See that?
But yeah.
I just wouldn't get a tattoo that can't cover, especially in an industry like this.
Yeah. So all this stuff's pretty intense, Mr. Smith.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
So, I assume, will we go over setting up the database again later on in the semester?
We will need to do a lot more stuff.
Like,
with the
that's like,
database.
there's a lot of steps there, and I'm like, there's no way I can repeat that right now.
There's a lot of stuff there. And that's kind of, all the database stuff is important. This set of chapters between 7 and 12, as far as I can tell, only ever adds that single table. That's not real world.
Right.
You're just saying, real world is easily 20 tables, is not
So,
unusual.
will we go further into it later in the semester with more
So
tables?
that's the plan. That's the plan. So this is why I want to go through this example pretty quick, is over these 2 weeks, and just because it's like, okay, here you can get an introduction to everything, and then we'll go into depth and all the other stuff that covers. Because if we took a week for each of these chapters, at the end of it, you would not know most of what you need to know. Because there's no images, there's only one table. You wouldn't have enough, you wouldn't know enough to get out in the industry if this was all we covered, if we stopped at chapter 12. So.
are you gonna get into any like the e-commerce part of it?
So there is an order processing sort of thing that chapter 9 kind of puts in, but it really just, it sends an email out. I would like to, at some point, give you an assignment to hook up Square, but that may not be until your final project. That may not be until your final project that I asked you to, like, okay, now you've got all this stuff, now get Square working with your website. So.
Square account.
That's what you think, it's, tab companies in Scotland.
So at the moment, just, yes, there's a lot of stuff that we're looking at. Take notes and look at the project as we're, outside of class to see where all those pieces are and how they fit together. But then we'll go through pieces and we'll do a lot more from there. So that's why I wanted to get this chapter 7 through 12 done pretty quick.
As of right now, is this what it's supposed to do?
Correct.
Add to cart?
Yes, that's exactly what it should be doing, right?
Okay.
Because that's what we're about to put in when we get back to cart. Is to fix that. We haven't implemented the cart controller yet.
Hanging in there on that Robin Hood. I think there's like a subreddit that I follow and it's just like hysterical because there's people on there that just do not care and like they'll YOLO like their money. They'll just buy like these stocks and then they'll lose all their money. But it keeps me like interested in it. Like I always check up on it. And,
Big word of advice. I would actually, if you're looking at what other people are suggesting, especially like forum, Reddit, don't just get out of there.
oh, you know, well, no, I only think I don't really follow what they say,
Yeah,
It's just
funny.
funny.
Because like, there's a well-known strategy out there where people go buy a stock they'll go buy a Dutch of a stock that's like a few dollars a share. They'll go buy thousands of that stock and then go to Reddit or social media or somewhere and say, oh, you should really, really buy this stock. People go buy it, it goes up, they sell their shares.
That's a good point.
Don't trust anything you read on social media as far as shares go. Don't use any of that as your stock buying advice whatsoever.
Yeah.
That's why I said I wouldn't even look at it.
I do that for the just the kicks, you know, the giggle, but honestly, yeah. No, I do a lot more, you know, Yahoo Finance, you can read up on it pretty often.
POV, if you have another really good thing to look at, price over earnings. So it's the total valuation.
Are you seeing your
If you
church
were to buy
songs?
100% of the stock, divided by the amount of earnings they have for that year. That gives you a good ratio of how
Tell them
price
they
the
still
stock
have
is.
it.
You went to a
Also,
Catholic
like,
church,
if
that's
you
about
look
it. I
at
don't
the
know.
stock and things like that, their feel.
There was
Where'd you get a church?
The value of the company
Where you went to a Catholic?
is
Where you
like
were.
how much it's actually
Yeah.
worth,
Yeah.
how much they earn.
You confirmed and everything,
You
man.
guys need to check
The
out.
stocks you want to buy or
You guys need to check out my church, it'll blow your mind, it's nothing like.
Dude, I'm telling you, like, those
That's
churches,
not the
Catholic churches.
end all be
Yeah,
all.
honestly.
It's like home, home, home.
Bro, I had to like bring the bread and wine. I had to speed.
Were you a kid?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did my parents didn't do it.
Come with me once a day.
They did me,
Too.
they did me like,
It's not overvalued.
alter
The other thing is-
Really?
Petitions.
She always sent her to Hollywood once too, so there'll be a ton of people, and I just sit there next to the tourists, like, it's like,
Whichever
"Fine,
they do
just
it all."
touch me.
Yeah.
That's not a stock you want to buy.
Right.
Remember when they do the petition?
Yeah.
I'm on, like in, Amazon.
My mom's talking about you,
Like,
like.
stock was like $1,500.
It's not worth it.
Okay, I stepped up.
Yeah.
I was supposed to like, more like, let's like,
So,
I was at this youth thing in college, in parkour, it's like non-denominational.
Yeah.
So you went.
There's some.
okay.
Pentecostals all.
All right, so let's get done here what we can before we break, because we won't be able to get all the shopping cart done today, but we'll get a few pieces in place. So again, if we go back and look at 214, this is kind of our goal. We want to have a list of products with add cart buttons. Once you click that, you're going to go to the cart. It's going to show you what you bought in your cart. You're going to have a continue shopping button that can take you back here. So you can cycle that way, buying things, adding things to your cart, until eventually you hit checkout now, which is going to take you to that enter shipping details and whatnot that we'll look at in chapter 9. Okay? So what we want to do, going back to our cart controller, we need to have a place to store the cart data. I'm going to add a method in here to do that, to take care of this. I'm going to call it getCart. Okay? This is a private method called getCart, returns a cart. So let's start walking through what this code is and what it does. So first of all, we have the session property that's part of every controller. Okay? Session is part of every controller. And it gives us a dictionary or a key value sort of mapping between here's the name of the thing that's in the session and here's the value of it. Okay? Now it stores everything, all the values are objects, all the keys are always strings. So I'm saying give me the session variable with key, cart. It's going to give me back an object. Well, I need it to be a cart object. So I'm going to say, well, turn it into cast it as a cart. Okay? Cast it as a cart. So if it turns out that it's null or anything other than a cart, I'll end up getting null into this variable. But if it is a cart, then I'll get that cart object. That's the way that works. Okay? I'm using as here instead of doing the explicit cast to avoid an exception. Because if it were some other data type, then casting it explicitly would result in an exception here.
So is that session assuming that the model is a cart object?
I'm assuming that, so the session is a dictionary, right?
Oh, okay.
Basic section is a dictionary. I'm saying given the value cart, there's some object potentially associated with it. This as cart says we'll assume, let's say we want that object, we want it as a cart. We want to say if it is a cart, then we're going to cast it to a cart. If it's not a cart, then it's just null. We don't care about it. Treat it as if it's not there. Okay? So if there is a cart variable stored in the session, okay, done. We just return it. If there already is a cart there saved in your session, we just return it. We're done. However, if there's not a cart stored in your session, well, we need to create one and put it in the session. So we create one, we create a new cart, and then we say session cart equals that cart we just created. Okay. So if you don't have a cart in your already started, we'll start you a new cart, and if you already have one started, we'll just resume with the cart you already have started.
Is that stored in your cookies?
So in this process, in the process of me doing this, in the process of me saying session cart that, if there's not already a cookie on the browser, it'll go ahead and take care of setting up that session ID. So this magically kind of deals with that. Okay. We don't generally need to know all of the details of how that works. It's worth knowing about, but you can see that all of this kind of happens. That's all we have to do to get sessions working initially. Now, to change how they work, to change what their timeouts are and whatnot, we have to write a bit more code, but this is the basic, hey, I just want to get started by saving it into a session. Okay? That's all you have to do to get started. You just read it in and write it out.
You said that session is part of the controller class?
Part of the controller class. So every controller has this member variable. This has this property, has a session property. Okay? So I can grab the session data that way. Now I need to implement a few different methods. First of all, I want the base, I want the view that's going to, I want the action that's going to give us a list of the items that are in your cart. It needs to take that return URL that we're getting. I'm going to just save that return URL to viewbag. And I'm going to pass on to that view, I'm going to say pass on the cart. So the view is going to receive the return URL via viewbag, but it's going to receive the cart via the model. Okay? That's just to keep things simple. Okay? I also need an action method in here to add things to the cart. So when I add something to the cart, I need to know what is the product ID and what is the return URL. Okay? What's the ID of the product that you want to add, and where are you going to go back when you're done? Similar thing if you want to remove something from the cart. I need the product ID and where you want to go back to. So you remember when we set up the add to cart button here, we have two hidden fields, one for the product ID, one for the return URL. You see these match up with these two properties here, these two arguments here. So whatever's in that hidden field for the product ID, whatever's in the hidden field for return URL, they're going to come in here as parameters. Okay. So first thing I need to do when I want to add something to the cart, in order to add to the cart, I need what? I need a product object, right? I need a product object. Where can I get that product object from?
The database.
I can get it from the database, right? So product is equal to what? Well, I need to start with the database. So underscore DB. I want to get it from the products table, and now I need to call some link, right? So given that I want the product law, let's say I want product 3, how can I get product 3?
Select.
So select, remember what did I used that a minute ago for getting the list of the category names, right? Select actually says I'm only interested in these parts, these properties, is a way of saying I only want,
Okay.
I want to kind of transform the data. So select is not what I want.
Fine.
Huh?
Fine.
Find is one option. Find is one option. There's actually three, there's at least three, there's 5 different methods I can call here and it will work, but they're different. So different, but they behave differently.
What about single?
Okay, so yes, single is another option. So find is one option. Single is another. What's another one I could use? I could use first. Okay, what else?
Take a while.
Huh?
Take a while.
Nope.
First or default.
Take says I want to take a certain number of things. I only want one resource. So first or default is another option.
And singular default.
Right. I could do single or default. All right, other options. Could I ask for the last one? Would last work? So last does work. Same thing with last or default. Okay. So any of these will get me the right answer. Okay. Any of those are options. I can use find, I can use single first last, or I can use single or default, last or use first or default, etc. I can use all of those. Okay. Now, just as a refresher, what's the difference, say, between first and first or default? What's the difference between those two?
One will throw an exception if it's not found.
Okay, one will throw an exception, the other doesn't. Which one throws the exception? Between first and first or default?
First.
First, yes. First throws an exception if there's no result found, right? So if I don't have a product with that product ID, I'll get an exception if I use first. The same is true for single first, or is true for any of those. Single, first, last. If I don't find a product with that product ID, I'm going to get an exception. Okay? So I don't want my application to crash, so I'm going to use one of the other three. Okay? I'm going to use one of the other ones because I don't want the application to crash. Okay? Now, why might I choose one or the other? Well, first is going to give me the first one that matches my criteria. Last is going to give me the last one that matches my criteria. Okay? Last or default is nearly always going to be slower than first or default, because in order for the last, it has to go through the entire list and then say, okay, I found the last one, right? Versus first, it just finds the first occurrence and it's done. So first or default is typically going to be faster than last or default. Okay? You got a hand up?
No, I was.
Okay. So what about single or default? Single or default still has to go through all of them and say, is there only one? Because it throws an exception if there's more than one. Okay? So the fastest option in these three is going to be first or default. Hands down. First or default is going to be the fastest of those three. If I want to be the safest, I'm going to use single or default, because there should only ever be one product with a given ID, right? In reality, it's just fine, because as far as I'm concerned, I should only be getting one result back from the database, right? Should only ever be expecting one result back from the database. So that's the one I'm going to use. I'm going to use single or default. Okay? So I'm going to say, give me the product with this product ID. Okay, and then I want to say if there is actually a product with that ID, then I want to add it to the cart. So I'm going to say get cart dot add product 1. So if I do find that product, then we're going to add one of those products to the cart. And then finally, regardless of whether or not I added anything to the cart, I want to send you to the index page. I want to send you to the index page so you can see what's in your cart. Now, redirect action. We haven't seen that method yet, have we? Okay. So what would be my other option that I could put here? I could say view index, right? If I put in view index, well, it would show the index view. The problem is, one thing I don't want you to do, let's say you add something to the cart and then refresh the page. Should that add it to the cart again? Probably not. So by redirecting you back to the cart index page, that means that when you refresh, you're refreshing cart index instead of refreshing add to cart. Does that make sense? So that's why I don't want to just say view index, because if you refreshed, you would be repeatedly adding things to the cart. I want you, when you refresh, you're just refreshing what's in your cart. Does that make sense? That's why that's there. Okay. So in fact, that's how we want to set up most of our post actions, as a redirect at the end, rather than showing a view, assuming it was successful. Okay? So we're going to redirect back to the index. Okay, that's all the code we need to write for the add to cart method. That's it. Okay. I do want to go through and implement the remove from cart method, but we're at time today, so we'll come back and we'll finish this up tomorrow. Please don't forget to upload what you have from today to make sure that it's on Git.